Oculon Studios presents The Pale Light Curse, written by Emma Price, edited by J.L. Lockwood, narrated by Peter Walters. A chilled wind howled across the vast Thalos plains of planet Torvin, carrying the dry scent of the outer basin, a dank memory of the distant petrified stalklands. They tore through the dull, scarred Kenoderm forests, stripping away their delicate pollen and causing the stalks to bend and shiver like trembling fingers in a frigid embrace. Each gust whispered of ancient, forgotten storms and the raw, untamed nature of Torvin itself. The towering mountains loomed at every horizon, their rust-coloured faces carved with deep, jagged crevices that wept shadow. The wind carried the tang of iron-rich dust, thick, metallic, and laced with something stranger, a sweetness that curdled quickly like the breath of an old battlefield, dry and faintly rotten. Overhead, the moon hung low, a bruised grey orb casting long shadows that danced like tormented ghosts across the wind-torn land. Asharn of Trin flared his high-set nostrils, drawing in the metallic tang that clung to the damp night air. His glistening eyes, peppered with dust and wide with alertness, strained against the glare of the low-hanging moon. Shadows flickered across his angular face, stirred by the restless wind. The dense fog, an eerie veil that had blanketed the Thalos plains since their arrival, was beginning to lift. As the mist receded, it revealed a broken path ahead, a jagged trail of stone and dust that cut through the substrata like an old wound left to fester. The ground beneath them was slick with dew and etched with strange, spiralling patterns left by the retreating fog. Each step forward produced the soft crunch of brittle, fractured stone. Across the horizon, a sudden crack of atmospheric static slashed through the sky like a blade, illuminating the jagged clouds in a violent burst of stark white light. For a fleeting moment, the distant spires of an old watchtower flickered into view, only to vanish once more into the gloom. Beside him, Darin of Ego, his apprentice and nearly a head taller, raised a muscular arm to shield his face from the surge of wind that followed. His long, fur-lined cloak snapped like a banner against his lean frame. A low roar rolled across the basin seconds later, vibrating through their boots and echoing off the surrounding cliffs, as if the very bones of the planet were grinding. Asharn said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He could feel it now, something ancient stirring beneath the plain, as if the land itself had taken notice of their presence, threatening, yet somehow welcoming. Then a bright slip of golden light pierced the colourless plain before them like a neon thread, woven through a world drained of colour. At first it was only one, small, flickering, like a candle flame caught in the wind. Soon others began to shimmer into view, scattered across the distant horizon like fallen stars rising from the stone-scattered ground. They pulsed gently within the shifting fog, casting wavering reflections across the muddy basin, hinting at something hidden and perhaps dangerous beyond the mist. These flickers of light were known only as pale lights. Darin had heard of them only in songs and brittle fragments of scripture, half-lost tales recited by firelight, steeped in mystery and dread. The stories often ended with the corpse net tree, a cursed monument of gnarled bark said to lure travellers to their doom. It was a name rarely spoken aloud, even among the old. Yet now, before his wide, unblinking eyes, the pale lights danced, real, brilliant, and uncomfortably close. A strange uneasiness settled over Darin, a cold dread that seeped into his bones. His long legs tensed, ready to bolt at a moment's notice. His body yearned to flee far from this haunted land, but he couldn't move. It was as if the mud had claimed him, or as if the lights themselves held him captive, whispering silently so that only his soul could hear their call. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum, a frantic rhythm that matched the rising fear. Darin stood rooted to the spot, caught between the wonder and terror as the pale lights slowly swayed through the mist, drawing closer with each passing second. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that he never would have ventured this close if not for his master's insistence on investigating the mysterious lights. Yet here he was, staring directly into his nightmare. A weight clamped around Darin's chest, part fear, part awe, as his eyes locked onto the dancing lights in the distance. His mind swirled with questions, each caught in the back of his throat. Every time he opened his mouth, the words dissolved like mist in the cold air. Asharn had once told him, during a quiet evening by the river fires, that the pale lights were not ghosts in the traditional sense, but lost travellers, souls who had willingly cast aside their mortal shells in search of something beyond flesh and time. They had transcended, he claimed, choosing to move forward as spirit alone. For speaking such things, Asharn had been ridiculed, branded a mystic, a fool. Others claimed the pale lights were cursed, victims of a cruel fate, condemned to wander in hollow agony, stripped of joy and memory, doomed to drift endlessly between realms. But Darin had never believed that, not truly. How could he, when he had seen his own best friend change before his very eyes? He had been only 10 years old, and Jital had been his closest friend for most of those years. Jital was a wiry, sharp-eyed boy, able to climb cliffs like the cat-like Fleckin, and often laughed in the face of danger. Then one day, without warning, Jital went silent. He refused to speak. His voice had been stolen. A day later, while playing ball in the village square, Darin had watched a pale glow rise from the spot where Jital stood. It engulfed him quickly, swirling upward into the sky. No body remained, no scream, no trace of what had happened to his friend, only the soft slap of the ball on the dusty ground. Just light and a hollow absence that lived on in Darin's memory. Jital had never stolen, never lied, never harmed anyone. If he had been cursed, it was not for sin, but something more tragic, something misunderstood. To this day, Darin could still remember the flicker of Jital's light and how it vanished slowly into the sky. He had never spoken of it aloud, but now, standing at the edge of the Thalos plains, watching the pale lights dance before him once more, he felt that old uncertainty rise again. These people were not being punished. No, this was something else entirely. But what was happening to them? No one knew for certain. Asharn pointed to a massive, shadowy form set against the horizon. "The corpse-net tree," he whispered. The corpse-net tree was less a tree and more a monumental, twisted mutilation upon the land itself, its trunk coloured like ash and wilting flesh rose from the cracked soil, twisting skyward like a skeletal finger clawing for escape. The Egret people told chilling stories of those who dared to approach it, all ending in tragedy. To step into its basin was to gamble with one's very identity. Names forgotten, bodies hollowed, lives stripped of meaning or shape. It was a fate many considered far crueler than death. The root-choked hollow was said to leach colour from the world, silence every sound, and slowly siphon the soul from anyone who wandered too close, leaving behind only an empty husk. And yet the pale lights glided toward the tree's heart, drawn to it as if answering an irresistible call, like lost children returning home. Darin turned his gaze toward the distant cliffs. Two figures stood motionless along a narrow ledge, barely visible through the drifting veil of fog. They wore long, tattered cloths, stained black by the rich, mineral-heavy soil. The moment their luminous eyes met his, they retreated without a sound, melting into the stone and vanishing into the mouth of a cave. It was as if the cliffs themselves had swallowed them. They were Egret, members of a reclusive group scattered among the Thalos tribes. Mysterious even by local standards, the Egret dwelled in fortified alcoves and simple braced dwellings carved into the mist-shrouded cliffs. Their homes clung to the rock like birds' nests, perched far enough from the corpse-net tree to remain untouched, yet close enough to keep watch over the plains. The Egret were recognized not only by their black robes, but by their luminous eyes, which glowed faintly in low light, and their exceptional hearing. It was said that this trait came from an ancient pact forged with the Kismitorin, a shadowy race that once lived deep within the crust of Torvin, beneath the sparse Kenoderm forests. Some said the pact sealed the Kismitorin's fate. Not one has been seen since. Others believed it was merely a gift, a bond between two ancient peoples. Whatever the truth, Darin knew this much. When the Egret appeared, they were never merely observing. They were listening, and they rarely showed themselves without cause. No, this was a warning Darin couldn't ignore. The Egret believed memory lived not in the mind alone, but in the breath, in every word ever spoken. To speak a name was to awaken its spirit and give it life. Because of this sacred bond between breath and soul, they kept a respectful distance from the corpse-net tree. Venturing too close, they believed, risked more than life. It meant surrendering one's name, one's very self, to the silence. Darin understood, at least in part, why the Egret chose to keep watch over the land. They considered it their duty to protect the scattered villages nestled beyond the mist-shrouded cliffs. Should the pale lights ever drift too far from the Thalos plains, the Egret would be the first to see, the first to warn. What Darin didn't understand, what no tale had ever fully explained, was why the pale lights were drawn to the corpse-net tree. That question gnawed at him, even as the fog continued to thin. Then he saw it. Rising from the cracked basin below was the corpse-net tree, its gnarled trunk twisted like petrified muscle, unnaturally wide, disturbingly organic. It was neither bark nor stone, but something in between. Veins of grey mossy green and deep burgundy spiraled up its surface in unnatural patterns. At its base the tree seemed almost alive, its texture rising and falling with a slow, shallow breath from something that should not be breathing. It was a sight few living eyes had witnessed and lived to tell the tale. Though it had once seemed distant, the shifting fog revealed it was much closer, only a short walk away. A heavy unease fluttered in Darwin's chest as he stared. It wasn't fear exactly, but something older, an ancient instinct stirring within him, warning that he stood before a doorway not meant for the living. And yet, despite that knowledge, the place pulled at him, as if it knew his name. Why do they come here? He wondered. Why did Jital? And why do I feel as though it's waiting for me too? The pale lights are beginning to stir, Ashen rumbled, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. He pointed with a gnarled finger toward the growing cluster of luminous spheres. They are drawn to the corpse net, just as the tales warned. But why? Why this tree? Why this place? The world is massive. Why not? Darwin began, only to be hushed by his elder. If we knew the answers so soon, we'd have no purpose here, Ashan said. He rested a weathered hand on his apprentice's forearm, urging him forward. Come, we only have until sunrise to uncover the truth. Darwin shivered, not from the wind, but from the cold dread curling in his gut. To lose one's body was terrifying, but to retain consciousness through such a fate, that was something else entirely, a nightmare without awakening. His glowing eyes, a trait from his half-egret bloodline, narrowed on the swirling mist as it curled around the tree's base. He stared hard, trying to see beyond the gnarled roots, into the dark chasm hidden below. Ashan continued onward, his gaze fixed on the faint glow shimmering through the fog. The egret understand the power of names, but their fear keeps them tethered to the surface, afraid to look deeper. We of the Memorari must go further, beyond fear, down to the root of what's truly happening here. He adjusted the sack slung over his shoulder. Inside, a collection of curious instruments and ancient scrolls rattled softly. The scent of damp stone and something vaguely metallic, like old blood, pricked Darwin's nostrils as they ventured deeper. He now understood the egret's strict avoidance of this place. A low hum, imperceptible to most, thrummed in his ears, a resonance his heightened senses alone could detect. It felt as though the land itself was sighing, exhaling the very colour from its bones. His glowing eyes brightened as they strained to pierce the thickening gloom clinging to the basin. Ashan paused and knelt by a patch of dirt where the grey rock gave way to a peculiar, vein-like network of dark tendrils, rooted deep into the bedrock. The roots stretch far, farther than I thought possible, he murmured. He touched one of the tendrils with a forked wand carved from an ash-burned stone, etched with ancestral symbols, often used in calming natural forces. It's not just a tree, Darwin. It might be the physical form of something much older, some dying creature of Torvin refusing to let go. Darwin leaned over his master's shoulder, eyes wide as he caught a faint pulsing within the roots, the same slow, rhythmic beat that mirrored the hum in his ears. It unsettled him, the idea that the ground itself might be part of the mystery, a living, breathing component of the pale light curse. "Should we continue?" he asked, uncertain. "I mean, if this is part of the corpse net tree, aren't we in danger? We should turn back before it's too late." Ashan tilted his head, considering. His gaze swept across the shimmering, pale lights now congregating in the basin's shallow jaws. "We came to seek the truth, not cower before it. Watch your step, stay clear of its reach. We should be safe enough. Come." They pressed on. Darin's eyes stayed fixed on the ground, terrified he might brush against one of the writhing roots. So focused was he on avoiding their touch that he didn't notice how close he was to the tree itself, until Ashen raised a firm arm, stopping him cold with a hand to the chest. Darin froze, inches from the corpse net's twisted surface. Ashan reached into his sack and withdrew the Eye of Aethel, its glass orb catching what little light filtered through the mist. Holding it tightly in his fist, he glanced at his apprentice and said with a crooked grin, "That wasn't so bad, was it?" Darin said nothing. His wide-eyed stare remained locked on the looming tree before them, his expression a tight mix of fear and awe. "But, Master," he finally said, voice strained, "the tales speak of the corpse net stealing all that makes a person who they are. How can we learn anything without risking the same fate?" He gestured toward a nearby pale light, drifting closer, its glow tinged with melancholy. It hovered in silence, a perfect sphere of soft pulsing light, and within its glow Darin thought he could almost make out the faint impression of a life once lived. "That's the trick, isn't it, my boy? Stay alert," Ashen replied calmly. "We need to uncover what remains of a person once the body is gone. What is life without form? The Memorari have pursued that question for generations." He raised the orb to his right eye, its surface shimmering with faint inner light. "This is the Eye of Aethel. In theory, it allows us to glimpse into these lost souls." As they neared the edge of the basin, the air thickened. The wind softened into a gentle, eerie stillness. Grey fog swirled with intent around the corpse-net tree's base, as if acting as its sentinel. The pale lights multiplied, weaving themselves into a luminous tapestry that spilled over the rim and vanished into the unseen chasm below. It was a place where the ordinary rules of existence began to unravel. Without hesitation, Ashan stepped across the unseen threshold. His silhouette flickered against the glow of the pale lights. Darin followed, heart pounding like a war drum. The wind's last whispers faded, devoured by the uncanny silence of the basin. Only the deep hum remained, low and ceaseless, vibrating through the soil of Torvin. The cold intensified. A strange pressure gathered behind Darin's eyes, as if his own spirit were being gently pulled from him. The pale lights floated closer. Within their orbs, Darin glimpsed flickering patterns, blurred impressions of faces, hands, perhaps even old gestures, lingering beyond death. It was like staring through warped glass into a forgotten world. They drifted slowly, aimlessly, or so it seemed, until one among them, brighter than the rest, pulsed in steady rhythm. It hovered near the discoloured trunk of the corpse-net tree. "Darin, watch," Ashan whispered, raising the Eye of Aethel. Its glass pulsed with a faint internal glow, mirroring the approaching pale lights. "These poor creatures aren't wandering. They're being drawn in, like powder flies to a flame." The bright, pale light drifted toward the ancient trunk. It hesitated briefly, then began to stretch, its orb-like form flattening, as if pulled by some unseen force. It was being absorbed. The hum intensified, rising like a crescendo inside Darin's skull. He clamped his hands over his ears, fearing his eardrums would rupture. The corpse-net tree swelled grotesquely, as though inhaling, its bark pulsing with dark energy. In that moment, Darin understood the egorat's deepest fear. To enter this basin was not merely to face death, it was to lose one's name, to be stripped of identity, swallowed into an eternal, nameless oblivion. Watching the bright, pale light vanish into the corpse-net tree, he felt a sickening truth settle in his gut. These souls were not fading, they were joining something, being reclaimed. Their essence, energy, memory, self, was fusing with the gnarled mass at the tree's heart. "We need to leave," Darin said sharply, voice tight with rising panic. Ashan remained rooted in place, his eyes fixed on the swirling procession of lights drifting around them. "The pale lights," he began, his finger slowly lifting to point toward the tree. "They are not just coming to die, they are drawn into the core of this creature." His voice took on a reverent hush. "This is no stalk tree. No, Darin. It must be a gateway between worlds." He held the eye of Ithel higher, its lens flickering with unnatural reflections. "It breathes them in. Names, memories, identity, everything your kin feared. It was all true." "Not just my kin," Darin muttered. He could feel his leg trembling beneath him, unbidden. "This is not natural. We've stayed too long. Master, we must leave now, before it consumes us as well." He reached out and gripped Ashan's shoulder urgently, but the old mystic did not move. His eyes shimmered in the pale light, transfixed. "We were sent here to uncover the truth of the pale lights," Ashan said flatly, "and I intend to do just that, no matter the cost." He shook Darin's hand off his shoulder with a sharp motion. Darin flinched, heart racing. "Even if the cost is your life, Master, please, listen to reason." Still, Ashan would not be moved. Frustrated, Darin turned away from the corpse-net tree, his back now to the glowing procession, as if not looking might somehow shield him from the horror unfolding. "To what end, Master?" he demanded. "Why would this creature need to absorb spirits unless for something dark, something evil? And if that's true, shouldn't we destroy it instead of study it?" His gaze swept across the hovering pale lights now massing near the basin's edge, glittering like fallen stars. Were they aware? He wondered. Were these fragments of kinfolk still conscious? Did they know what was happening as their essence was drawn away, slowly devoured? Ashan stepped closer to the tree-like creature, his gaze locked on the shifting, organic patterns spiraling across its darkened bark. "I've seen these patterns before," he murmured, "in a tome written by our ancestors, one long hidden in the vaults of the Memorari. They spoke of a stalk tree that once walked across the Thalos plains, devastating villages in its wake." Darin turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "Walked, Master?" Ashan nodded once, eyes never leaving the bark. "Stalk trees do not walk?" Darin's voice was flat with disbelief. "They are planted, rooted, bound to the firmament." Ashan's voice was low. "Then perhaps this one broke the rule." The old master nodded solemnly. "Yes," he murmured distantly, his mind adrift in thought. But this is impossible. The ancient Necruldra of Torvin went extinct long ago." "Necruldra?" Darin repeated, turning back to the tree-like creature. He too had heard the name. Whispers of an ancient being, rooted within the basin, said to drain the essence from the land. A twisted sentinel that harvested children's souls as they slept and stole the songs from the throats of the nesting, bird-like compsids. "But that's just a fairy tale," Darin said, eyes narrowing. "A myth." "No," Asham whispered, as if trying to convince himself. "Apparently not. It's the only explanation." Before he could say more, Darin caught sight of his master's hand reaching out toward the tree-like creature's bark. "Wait!" Darin snapped, snatching Ashan's wrist back. The old mystic's eyes flashed, momentarily irritated. "What if—" Darin began, but Ashan cut him off with a dismissive snort. "What if what?" he said sharply, then turned back to the bark, trailing his fingers just above its twisted surface. This ancient stalk tree, or whatever creature it originated from, has evolved. It sustains itself by draining the life force from those who are drawn to it, growing stronger with every soul it consumes. I'd stake my reputation on it." He faced Darin, eyes bright. "I don't believe this is a curse at all. It's a form of evolution. This being strives to continue its existence by merging with the consciousness of others." Ashan's gaze swept over the shimmering lights pulsing within the chasm. "The old stories claim it doesn't devour souls like a mindless monster. It integrates them, folds their thoughts, feelings and memories into itself. It's becoming a single vast mind, built from the remnants of countless others." A strange calm began to settle over Darin, chasing away the dread that had clung to him. If this was not destruction but integration, what then remained of the individual? "But Master," he asked softly, "what is it like? What does it truly mean to become a pale light, to lose one's body yet still live on? The Egorets speak of losing one's name, but does the self vanish entirely?" Ashan's eyes, usually sharp and confident, held a flicker of sadness. "That, Darin, that is the question. The Memorari need to understand this transformation, but to know how it feels." He shook his head. "That's beyond our reach. It would mean surrendering everything. And that," he added gravely, "is not a sacrifice I'm willing to make." He gripped the eye of Aithil tighter, his fingers curling around the smooth glass. A pulse of light shimmered within. But Darin's attention was no longer on Ashan or the orb. His gaze was fixed on the shimmering horde of pale lights and the slow, rhythmic pulse of the corpse-net tree's trunk. His half-Egoret blood stirred with the subtle shifts in the air. The energy here called to him. A quiet song, inaudible yet unmistakable, echoed in his mind, a melody that felt familiar, and as it swelled, something strange happened. He smiled. "Master," Darin began, exhaling deeply. His voice carried a hesitant conviction, as if he wasn't entirely certain what he was about to say. "If this ancient being's merging of consciousness is part of our evolution, then just watching isn't enough. To truly understand the pale light curse, we need to experience it. I'm volunteering to undergo the transformation, to see what it's like." Ashan's eyes snapped towards him, his brow furrowing with alarm. Darin, you can't be serious. We are sworn to observe, not to partake. We are still guessing at what's happening here. There are too many unknowns. You speak of needing answers, but the cost may be your very soul. You said we must do what it takes, Darin countered, taking a tentative step toward the chasm's edge. What if the self isn't lost, but ascends? What if it's not destruction, but reshaping? The egret believe memory lives in the breath, that to speak a name gives it life. If this being draws breath, if it absorbs energy from others, doesn't that make it a collection of all that ever was? His luminous eyes now pulsed with internal light, matching the vibrations of the pale lights. He felt a pull, deep and inexplicable, like the orbs themselves were calling him, inviting him to become one of them. Darin, no. If anyone is to go, it should be me. I forbid you from... Ashen's cry was cut short as a sudden gust of wind roared around them, tearing his words from the air. He reached out, grasping for Darin's arm. But it was too late. Darin was already moving, drawn forward in a dream-like trance. The hum in the air intensified, deep and resonant, calling him in. "I must know, Master," Darin breathed. He turned back with a strange calm, a wide grin spreading across his face, as though, in that moment, he understood his purpose. We mustn't fear the unknown, but embrace it and the knowledge it offers. He lingered at the chasm's edge, his boots rooted to the ground. Every instinct screamed at him to run. His chest heaved, heart pounded too fast to control. This is madness, he thought. Not bravery. He remembered Jital, the echo of his laugh, the ball bouncing in the square, and how he had vanished without warning, leaving behind only silence. What if stepping forward meant the same fate? Obliteration, not transformation. Darin swallowed hard, sweat cooling on his skin despite the stillness in the air. Then the hum returned, low, steady, inviting. In it he sensed no menace, no cruelty, only invitation. The pale lights didn't cry out in agony or scream in rage. They shimmered and waited for him. They seemed to understand his hesitation. They pulsed in unison with his breath. The fear still clung to him, but his curiosity had grown stronger, stronger than doubt. Maybe, he thought, the only way to understand what happened to Jital and all the others was to stop running and step into the truth. With a firm nod, he stepped forward into the deep chasm. The grey fog swirled around his ankles, curling upward like grasping fingers. As he reached the basin's floor, the radiant spectacle of the pale lights shimmered before him, a tapestry of luminous souls. The deep echoing hum, the very breath of the corpse-net tree, now resonated within his chest. He paused, eyes closed. He summoned the image of his own hand, the worn texture of his tunic, the intricate patterns etched into the stone beneath his boots. He took a deep, shuddering breath, filling his lungs, his whole being. This, he knew, was the final breath of Darin, son of Ego, apprentice to Ashan of Trin, at least in this mortal form. Then, without hesitation, he stepped forward into the shimmering heart of the pale light curse. For a moment, terrifying and exhilarating, he felt himself falling, not through space, but through existence itself. The world unravelled around him, the cool touch of fog, the scent of Torvin's ancient crust, the solid weight of the earth. None of it vanished, but it all grew distant, like memories fading into dream. His limbs seemed to dissolve, not with pain, but with a curious gentleness. A tingling, like the numbness of a limb asleep, began to overtake him. Molecule by molecule, his form unbound, each piece a tiny spark of light, loosened from the prison of flesh and bone. The humming grew louder, not in his ears, but in his being, a vibration that filled his consciousness. His awareness expanded. He could feel the world now, the shifting air, the pulsing land, the quiet presence of every pale light. There was no fear, no panic, only an overwhelming sense of freedom. And then his body was gone. In its place floated a sphere of radiant, pulsing light. But he was still Darin. No panic gripped him, only curiosity. His memories remained, his goals, his thoughts. The essence of who he was had not been lost. The eagerate belief that memory is tied to breath now seemed almost poetic. His breath had ended, but his consciousness was the breath that lived on. He drifted, weightless, among the others. No longer distant glows, the pale lights now revealed themselves as unique points of awareness, each a flickering universe of sensation and memory. He felt them beside him, not speaking, not touching, but sharing a presence, a quiet communion. And then he felt the pull. Not gravity, not force, but a magnetic invitation. From the very core of the corpse net tree, the ancient hum beckoned, not commanding, but offering. The pull Ashan had spoken of now resonated within him, deeply and warmly. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't erasure. It was unity, a merging, not to lose the self, but to become something more, not to end, but to expand. He longed to join, to add the sum of his experience to the great consciousness he now felt pulsing at the creature's heart. It felt like home, an ancient home, vast and timeless, where memory was not kept in books but in being. He sensed it all, the layered thoughts of countless lives, the chorus of memory and will flowing into one being who remembered everything. Darin drifted closer, ready to become part of something eternal. As Darin drifted closer to the twisted stalk tree, a flicker of memory pulled his awareness downward. He saw Ashan far below him in the mist, staring upward. The old master stood frozen, his face stricken with shock and sorrow. One trembling hand clutched his chest as if to steady a heart breaking open. At his feet lay the Eye of Aethil, its crystalline sphere shattered, its light extinguished. Ashan was crying, quietly at first, tears streaming down his lined face. Then came a raw, anguished cry that echoed across the stillness of the basin. "Darin!" The name reached him, clear, aching, familiar, but distant now, a sound from another life. He was still Darin, but no longer flesh and voice. He was thought, essence, pure energy. The name stirred something within him, but already it belonged more to Ashan than to himself, a relic of what he had been. The pull of the corpse net tree surged within him, strong, undeniable. It felt like returning to a hearth after wandering, cold and alone for lifetimes. he extended himself, not with arms or breath, but with his very being, toward the glowing bark. There was no resistance, only release. For an instant his light dimmed, not fading, transforming. He flowed into the tree's core, joining its vast ancient memory. He became part of something greater, something immense and eternal. The tree's history unfolded around him like 1,000 blooming stars. Countless voices, thoughts and dreams greeted him, not in words but in presence. In this place he was never alone. And yet he remained. Still Darin. He felt Ashan collapse to his knees, his sobs swallowed by the basin's stillness. Darin watched from within, and all around the shape of grief etched across the face of the man who had guided him in his youth, taught him, believed in him. That image lingered, not as pain, but as memory, etched forever into Darin's new form. As the last fragile thread of his material spirit unravelled, it left no void, only peace, only presence. The quiet pulse of unity hummed through him as he settled into the quiet, steady energy of the corpse-net tree, alive, aware, and eternal. The end.